To the State Library of Queensland. For those of you who haven't been before, we give you an especially large welcome. And for those of you that have been back here several times, we hope you continue to come. Firstly, let me respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting here tonight. Let me also contextualise this talk a little bit tonight. The State Library of Queensland presents a diverse series of public programs, talks, debates and conversations with leading thinkers, artists and writers of our time, and we call this Deepen the Conversation. The whole idea is to have the conversation on stage, some conversation with you as an audience before you leave, and then we hope that you will take away the thoughts, ideas and stimulus that you will take on tonight and indeed continue the conversation when you leave this venue. Tonight it's a really exciting panel for us and we are really pleased to present Reforming Women in the 21st Century. This talk is brought to you by the State Library in conjunction with the Reforming Women exhibition, which features the Brisbane Women's Club. It is currently being displayed in the Philip Bacon Heritage Gallery, which is on level 4. It is closed now when you leave this session, but it will be open every day between 10 and 5, and we encourage you hugely to come back and see that exhibition if you haven't already. We also encourage you and let you know that there is a display of feminist and suffragette literature, especially being chosen by one of our reference librarians, on display in level 2. And for those of you, and I'm going to even encourage the panellists about this, it really is extraordinary what is in the repositories in this library. And we encourage you to go and have a look. They're books that are often behind the scenes rather than on the shelves. The exhibition that we talked about is a true celebration of the achievements of the Brisbane Women's Club in their centenary year. It brings together the stories of some of the most dynamic women of the last 100 years. It is an account of Queensland trailblazers such as Margaret Ogg, Daphne Mayo and Irene Longman. However, tonight we don't have those people with us, but we do have other trailblazers. It's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Dr. Cherrell Hirst, AO, Davida Allen, Zoe Rathus, and facilitator Elizabeth Jamison. Each of the women on the stage has become successful trailblazers in their own right and in their own field. And as such, they have become leaders for my generation and indeed for those that follow. There's arguments, of course, in a time when television is bombarding our youth, particularly our young female, with images that sexualise young women. It's imperative that we provide other models and alternative views of women. Arguably, and I say arguably, some studies see the shift in aspirations of the next generation. I have to say it's not necessarily my experience with some of the young women I know, but some of them, the studies tend to say that whilst girls a generation ago were striving to be doctors, lawyers and engineers, now there is an aspiration for celebrity, models, actresses, singers, tabloid. And that's an interesting thing and probably will be discussed tonight. So tonight we invite you to listen firsthand to the stories of these women who have carved out their paths in the world and in doing so have reached glass ceilings in their fields. The stories of our panellists will inspire and excite, and I know their conversation with the chair and with each other will be of great interest and stimulus, and I hope a starting point for a much needed discussion on who are our young girls and indeed our children's positive female role models. So it's my great pleasure now to hand over to Elizabeth Jamison to open the discussion, and please I ask you to join me in a warm welcome.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome, and thank you all for coming along this evening to hear the lineup of models, actresses and celebrities that we have assembled for you. Being reforming women of the 21st century, they have steadfastly refused to sit in the order in which they are to be introduced, and I steadfastly refuse to change the order in which I introduce them. So I will first of all introduce Dr. Cherrell Hirst, AO, who's sitting in the middle of the panel group here. Our first reforming woman this evening. Cherrell is a medical doctor by background, but also with formal educational qualifications in education. These dual qualifications have seen her achieve across a remarkable range of activities in her life, gaining a national standing in the field of breast cancer screening and research as director of the Wesley Breast Clinic for many years, which was largely what led to her being named as Queenslander of the Year in 1995. Cherrell has also occupied a decade in the chair as Chancellor at QUT and also a decade in the chair as Chair of the Board of Brisbane Girls Grammar School, amongst many other boards, and these days still sits on a range of boards, public, private and not-for-profit, including the boards of Suncorp, Metway and Pepland Biotech. All of these endeavours and many others have led to her receiving 3 honorary doctorates, so she is Dr. Cherrell Hirst this evening, as well as many other forms of recognition in the community. Dr. Cherrell Hirst. Davida Allen is our reforming woman in the field, or perhaps I should say multiple fields of the arts. First exhibiting what are now nationally and internationally regarded expressionist works in Davida's case. She first exhibited in a solo exhibition in Brisbane in 1973. But of course, she was the distinguished first woman to win the Archibald Portrait Prize in 1986. And not satisfied with only one field of the arts, she is also a published author of a novel and a short story in a published edition. From that point moved on also to become a scriptwriter and director of the film Feeling Sexy, which was the opening film for the 1999 Brisbane International Film Festival. Davida's works are now found in galleries across the world, from Toowoomba to New York, literally, covering all styles of galleries, including the University of Queensland Gallery, the National Gallery of Australia, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the Toowoomba Art Centre. Davida Allen. And last but not least, we have Zoe Rathus, a humble solicitor by background, but there being no such thing is there, Zoe. It's okay, I can say that too. Zoe very quickly learned that from such a humble platform she could do an awful lot in the way of reform. Legal reform has very much been Zoe's basket of goodies. She presently is the Director of Clinical Program and Senior Lecturer at Griffith University Law School. But she is, I can say, most widely known in the law as the long-standing coordinator of the Women's Legal Service and, moreover, importantly, one of the founding members of that wonderful organisation. And it was that achievement that led to her being the inaugural Queensland Woman Lawyer of the Year in 2001. In addition to all of these achievements, particularly in the field of women's legal rights in our own community, Zoe has occupied a post that I can most confidently assert nobody else in this room would have been anywhere near, and that is the Secretariat Multi-Party Parliamentary Women's Group, Cape Town, South Africa. Do we have anyone else here that's occupied that post? Zoe Rathus is obviously our third reforming woman. So thank you all for agreeing to take part in this conversation, and it is, as mentioned, the conversation has been mounted to coincide with the exhibition, which is up on level 4, and which we commend to you all to celebrate the 100 years anniversary of the Brisbane Women's Club Foundation in 1908. When you look at some of the exhibits in that exhibition, and from many of the great stories that we already know, these are often about reforms, major reforms in important areas of society and municipal life, politics and beyond. But what we would like to talk about this evening are the very personal journeys that people make because those reforms invariably happen one step at a time. And I suppose I would like to start by asking each of our panellists at a very personal level what you would regard as your most important breakthrough moment in your own field of endeavour. Zoe, can I start by asking you that question?
I knew it was a problem to sit here.
Yeah,
How
always.
close do I have to get to this microphone? You can hear me from here? Okay. The back row said nothing, which means they've got no idea what I just said. Yeah.
Can you wave? Yes, they can hear you.
Look, I'm sure that for me that moment really was the beginning of the Women's Legal Service. I was one of the many women that founded that organisation and that decided that it was important to do something like that, who met one night in a rather run-down women's house which was about to move. I think it was about the last week they were in those particular premises, and they were premises that no women's organisation should have been required to operate out of. And we met there and decided to start the Women's Legal Service, and we literally handed a hat around that night and, as women do, appointed hopelessly long lists of tasks to everyone who'd come along that night. And it was not too long after that the Women's Legal Service actually opened its doors and commenced operations. We really were determined to do that very, very quickly. And I still am delighted when I meet a woman who I don't know at all and who, in some conversation, will find out that I had something to do with Women's Legal Service, and she will say, "Oh, I contacted that organisation 10 years ago and they put me on the right track." And just to be aware of how many women have just come through those doors or been on that phone and been assisted still gives me a thrill.
And in terms of achieving that breakthrough moment, is it as simple as that, as just a breakthrough?
I suppose that seeing it in the paper saying that the Women's Legal Service had opened its doors, but it was the work. I mean, I think that with so many of the reforms that we see with women, it was all of us who made that happen. It was that very strong group that were determined to move forward, and then to suddenly see that it had happened. And it happened because of that energy and the determination of that whole group to do that.
Davida, for those of us who can only ever dream of winning an Archibald, is it as simple as that being the breakthrough moment for you?
Well, my answer really bypasses the Archibald. I think it's interesting when you answer a question as big as this one. At the time when the breakthrough came, you probably weren't, personally I wasn't that aware of it, but at 57 I can look back and they're little milestones that are quite clear. I think the first one was my parents were very National Party, aristocratic people. My mother was the most beautiful dressmaker, and my father always thought that he knew what men liked. So when I had pins sticking into the brown velvet dress that my mother made, myself and my sister had to walk down the hallway to my father to parade in front of him because he knew what men liked. If the dress was approved, my mother would continue finishing it. So, interestingly enough, growing up with this authority to conform, to be pretty, to be wanted by men, presumably. This was the bigger picture, no doubt, and then I'd end up getting married. One particular party, I must have been about 16, and my mother was making the dress for the party, and everything had been arranged with my parents' friends, so the boy had been chosen. It was a party where the 17 and I would have been about 16, so the 16, 17 and 18-year-old children would have been at one end of the Toowoomba Carnival of Flowers stand, and the parents would have been at the other end. And Anton, I can remember his name, it will never go out of my brain. Anton was short, much, much shorter than me. And I thought, how on earth am I going to cope with this? And so I asked my mother, could she sew some ballet slippers with the same material as the dress? Because then no one would guess that I was wearing ballet slippers. It would look all perfectly normal and very, very chic and vogue. Anton, who actually was a bit smart, first thing he said when he came to pick me up is, well, you didn't have to wear flatties. But I'd already won. I'd won my battle. I'd won my battle that through creativity I had coped with the fact that we were the same height all night, so it wasn't really visually that embarrassing. And ever since that time, I've noticed lots of little things come up all through your life, and it's creativity that always wins out. Poor Anton, though, hey?
Yeah, that is truly inspiring, Davida. We wouldn't have guessed that was the breakthrough moment, the Archibald Prize winner. That's fantastic. Cherrell, your endeavours have interestingly crossed a whole range of different fields, from what might seem an unlikely beginning, the path that you've taken. Do you see a simple breakthrough point?
No, Elizabeth, I don't see a breakthrough point at all. A little bit like Davida, thousands of times. And I think for me, the kind of, if they are breakthrough points, have been when I've realised that I could actually do something. I've been put in a situation, either by my own doing or by somebody else's doing, where I've had to do something. And so I've done it, and I've realised that I could do it. And I've learnt, I've gained confidence, I've learnt that you can find solutions, you can overcome challenges, difficulties, fears, things you're afraid of. And each time you do that, it's easier to do it the next time. So I suppose I can't remember a first time, but I can remember a few terrifying moments when I have survived, and I've learnt from the experience, and I've taken that experience on to the next opportunity. And I guess all along the way, I've gained much more confidence to believe that I can actually meet the challenge and fill the opportunity in a way that.
Well, aren't you going to tell us which specific one? Having said there was a specific one.
No, I said there wasn't a specific one.
Well, can I perhaps what that prompts for me in terms of specific questions specific issues that I would anticipate you might encounter, Cherrell, and so tell me whether you did or not. Was it a greater, in terms of your journey from starting as a medically qualified doctor into corporate boardrooms, is it a greater barrier to be a woman or a doctor? Because those boardrooms can tend to be fairly, dominated by.
It was never difficult to be a doctor as a woman. Never, I don't think.
No, sorry.
Yes.
I mean, in terms of the journey into the boardrooms, the old cliques of lawyers and accountants that can dominate those fields.
Yes.
Because presumably that's where a number of your
contributing in a positive, constructive fashion in the boardroom is a greater challenge than practicing medicine, because you're dependent on everybody else in the boardroom, and whereas as a doctor, it's an individual relationship with the patient.
So in terms of your fellow directors sitting around tables, my question though is, do you think for them the greater barrier that was put up for you, was it coming from a field where that was not seen as the traditional path into the boardroom, namely being a doctor, or were there barriers because of being a woman getting into the boardrooms?
Probably both. I think being a doctor and not having certainly on the board of Suncorp Medway, there are still hundreds of people that say, "Oh, how did you get onto the board of Suncorp Medway?" So that's an ongoing challenge. My fellow directors don't ask me that, fortunately, but shareholders and other people do. So I think that has been a challenge, but I think it all comes back to competence and demonstrating your competence and demonstrating your ability to contribute in whatever situation you find yourself. So once you can contribute and once you can demonstrate your competence, I don't think it matters whether you're a man or a woman, really, and that's my experience. I think it's being competent.
So let's shift the focus then a bit, and I'll ask you to lead off with this question too, Cherrell, but then I promise to leave you alone, and I'd like to know what Zoe and Davida's views on this are too. The motivation for those, you mentioned it's a matter of constantly breaking through and gaining the confidence. Do you want to talk about what have been the motivators for you?
I think initially my motivation was all around becoming competent, interestingly enough, and being really good at what I was doing. I think to be really good at what you're doing is probably the most important personal challenge for me, and something that I've sought wherever I've found myself. And I think initially that was my motivation. But then I think as I had these opportunities to contribute, I then began to realise that I could influence things, and it was more than just being good at what I was doing myself. It was actually contributing to a picture of success and encouraging others to be confident and to be motivated and to grasp opportunities and to believe in themselves and to do these same kind of things and to learn from each little experience along the way.
Thank you. Zoe, again, you talked about there's a whole lot of moments that lead up to even the breakthrough in your case. The motivation to get to that point?
I think for me it was, I became quite politicised about the idea of being a woman studying law, perhaps even before I started to do law. And it was actually a comment that my mother made to me when I was trying to work out what I was going to do, because my father is actually a doctor, and a lot of my friends at school were going to be doctors. And so people started to say to me things like, "So you're going to do medicine?" And I had never said that to anybody. Now, it was a vague idea in my mind, but I must say, as maths and physics and chemistry became more and more difficult for me, the idea of actually studying medicine and knowing I had to do those subjects early on was a great disincentive. And I started to come up with other answers. So when people would say, "You're going to do medicine, aren't you?" I'd say, "No, I'm going to do," and I had to come up with an answer. So I started to say law, because I talk a lot, I think, and it seemed like a good kind of criterion to have. And when I was talking to my mother about that, she was very aware of the fact that it would be important, interesting, different to be a woman in the law. So I was very interested in the idea that if I did study law, I would be a woman in the law. And so from very early on, that idea was of great interest to me. And so I guess that I chose to do some assignments around issues that were relevant to women when I was at university. But it took until I got into practice to actually work out what my real passion would be. I certainly didn't find it in books and in study. I found it when I started to work as an article clerk, and there was a refuge that brought a lot of clients to the firm that I was working at, because the young guy who'd been there before me as the article clerk, I think had struck up a bit of a relationship with one of the refuge workers somewhere, and I think he kept on trying to get her to come back with more clients, and then he left, and they rang one day and he wasn't there anymore. And so it wasn't actually that I even knew enough to seek that work, but as soon as I started working for those women, I found my passion. I had not heard those stories before. I did not understand about domestic violence and about its brutality and the ongoing impact that it had on the lives of women and children who live with it. And of course, this was 1981. There was no legislation specifically for domestic violence in Queensland, and there was almost no recognition of domestic violence in the law. And so working with those women and understanding that the law just completely failed to acknowledge their existence was then a driving force for me and an absolute motivation.
So finding the thing that you were passionate about, it became the motivator in itself.
Right.
Davida,
Can I jump in there,
Cherrell?
Elizabeth? Because that was actually very similar to my experience. I didn't go to the Wesley Breast Clinic because I believed I had a great thing to offer women with breast cancer. It was a research job, actually, and I thought that was what I wanted to do. But as I started working with the women, and as I recognised that the medical system, as it was provided for most women with breast cancer totally let them down. That then came the opportunity to change things and to provide a different approach and a different way of doing it, and to really just change the whole paradigm of the way women with breast cancer were looked after. And so that became my then driving passion, and then I could extrapolate that into other areas. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I want to come back actually on a point that you both raised there, but before I do, Davida, particularly in the creative endeavour, is motivation a greatly different thing?
Well, I was really fortunate because I was at Stewart Home in Brisbane, and I just lived for my art class, and I had Betty Churcher as my teacher. And I'm a total and utter believer. I'm a mother of 4 daughters, and I know, and they hate me saying it to them, but in inverted commas, it's the people you know. And you either seek out people who you're interested in. I mean, even coming tonight, people have come tonight, because they're all commonly interested in what we're talking about. I was in art class and I lived for art class, and I just knew whatever I was going to do would have something to do with art. My parents could only think of art as sex, drugs and rock and roll. There was absolutely no way that Davida was going to be allowed to go to the East Sydney Technical College, which was the place to go in those years. We're talking about early 70s. And Betty, in all her charm, a mother of 4 boys, completely convinced my mother and father that it was the most perfectly normal thing to do. And I went to East Sydney. I failed. I couldn't do the colour wheel. And my whole life was a complete and utter disaster. I didn't know what I was going to do, so Betty organised that I'd move from East Sydney, from a failed student, to her husband, Roy Church's class. He was teaching here in Brisbane, which is now the QUT, which is very amusing, sitting beside these 2 girls here, because in my day it was the Brisbane College of Art. And everything just became perfectly normal then. Everything just went on as it's been going on for the last X number of years. So I think the lesson to that is that you do seek out people who have got your interests. You need believers. And I am constantly saying to my children, all the motivation in the world can come from inside, but you do need help. You can't do anything totally on your own.
Davida, one of the comments that's always stuck with me was that of a young female athlete who made the comment that a similar sort of comment about needing to have those that went before you, in a sense, to be part of the progress towards success. And she said it was her observation that success leaves clues, and that you have to listen and watch for those that went before. In terms of, Betty Churcher is a wonderful connection, I suppose, for you to have had in that regard. What were the sorts of clues that you looked for from her, or were there, or was it just a matter of being connected with her and imbued with the sense of...
Yeah, I think it was her nurturing, really, and she just seemed to be a bit like Moses. There'd be a big flood of river in front of you, and Betty would just come up and the water would pass and you'd just walk through. I was extremely privileged, and I think had you had your life again, I simply don't... my barrier with my parents, they just could not... They didn't want an artist in the family, It was just something you didn't want. It was just too... And also, Dad knew what men liked, so...
Yeah, thank you. Well, sex, drugs and rock and roll is not so associated with the law. Lots of families are quite happy, not outwardly, Zoe. Lots of families are happy to have lawyers in the family. But in your case, were there signs of success from others in the field around you, or was it from beyond the field of the law that you got clues of success in terms of your passion for reform in women's legal rights?
Well, I think I just have to take up the sex and drugs and rock and roll and say
Disabuse us of that notion,
when I first was invited to speak here tonight, and someone did make the comment to me out there in the foyer before, they'll remain nameless for now, but did ask whether this was about reforming us, or reforming women. I think that some of my friends have thought that I've come along here tonight to be reformed. Now, whether that's because they think I have a history of sex, drugs and rock and roll, I'm not sure, or a future maybe.
Indeed.
But I think that for me, some of the really people, I suppose, who I found inspiring in particular in the law was when I became involved in the community legal centre sector. So having developed that passion and got involved in women's legal service, but I was still in private practice, and there were certainly many wonderful women I met there, and many wonderful women from my time at university who were great friends and who've gone on to be magnificent contributors to the community. But I think that when I joined community legal centres, I met so many women who, and it comes back to that earlier point about it's small things that make the changes. And when you meet the women who work in community legal centres, you realise these are very ordinary women, very humble women, very much the humble solicitors, social workers, community workers, people who contribute in just everyday ways. And from then getting involved at Women's Legal Service and starting to work in the organisation in the end, then opened up the whole world of women's services to me, and those extraordinary women who populate women's services. And these are ordinary women who do extraordinary work. And I think that then it was that peer group, I mean, of all ages, of course. I think that was, particularly when I first started, many of the women were much older and were, very much products talking about the kind of what happens to young women today. And, I mean, these were women who'd been through the famed second wave of feminism. And so, we were kind of the end of that generation to some extent. And to just talk with those women, to hear the compassion that they had for their clients, but just to hear their life stories as well, and how they went about conducting their lives. Those were my inspirations and keys. And success wasn't about, it certainly wasn't about awards or fame or anything. Success was about doing good work in the place that you'd chosen to do your work from.
Cherrell?
Yes, I think mine is a similar experience. It's about, as I said before, it's about doing things well. So I've always been highly inspired by people who are very, very good at what they do, whether they're artists, whether they're researchers, whether they're lawyers, whether they're whatever they do. So I think doing what you do well is inspirational for me, and it's always something that I aspire to. But I think what Zoe's talking about is meeting and working with other women. And I consider myself absolutely as an ordinary woman. The year I was Queensland of the Year, I gave this address many times. I'm an ordinary person, just like everybody else in this room, and let's think about what we can do together. So it was the opportunity to work with other ordinary people who were working for others, who had personal integrity and were willing to give and to share and to sacrifice, in fact, for the benefit of others. And I think being part of those sort of communities, and there are many of them, and it is very often largely women, that has been, I guess, where I've gleaned my success and been motivated to keep trying.
Thank you. I'd like to allow plenty of time for some questions from the floor. I'll just flag we've got about 15 minutes for questions from the floor, and then I would like to come back and finish off to hearing from each of the panellists about their views on what are the remaining frontiers for reform in 2008, and what are their perhaps dreams in that regard. So while they're thinking about that, can I ask if anyone would like to lead off with a question for any or all of our esteemed panel? And if you don't, I'll easily fill in the airspace. So yes, there's a microphone coming across here. Yeah.
Direct my question to Dr. Hirst. in the diversity of what you do intrigue me. Are there any particular skills that you transfer from the medical and educational world to sit on a board of Suncor, which to me, sounds like figures and high finance? And did you find that there were particular skills that you had personally or organisational skills from your field that you were transferring and it was working?
I think, I've had a wonderful set of opportunities in my life, and I do think that with each opportunity I've had, I've got better at doing what I'm doing because I have used the skills that and maybe it's the understanding more than the skills, but I guess it's the people skills. I believe that every organisation is based on the people who are in that organisation and the way they work together. So I think fundamentally everything comes back to the people and the capability that those people bring to the group. I learned a lot about that in my world as a doctor, but I equally learned about it and could transfer it through to my world in education. And whilst, I'm currently in venture capital, which is someplace I never in a million years, and even a year ago I'd have said to you, oh my God, no, that's not me. But I think it's understanding, and it's recognising that you don't rely on yourself for all the knowledge and all the skills. You make sure that you find people that you can work with, rely on, trust, you recognise expertise in others, and through your people skills, bring all of those combined skills in the group of experts to deliver.
Thank you. There's a question also in the front row.
The speakers were talking about breakthrough moments. I was wondering about obstacles and how speakers have confronted and overcome obstacles that have presented themselves throughout your careers, working lives.
Davida.
My most hugest obstacle was sin. At Stewart Home, the nuns, and it was nuns' country then. Now you can't find anyone, but basically it was sin, and I used to confess impure thoughts weekly. And
only weekly,
and it was
Davida.
a real. It was we only had I
okay.
I thought them daily. We only had confession on Saturdays, and it was.
Thank you for clarifying.
It was huge. It was a huge thing. This sin, I was late. I failed grade 4, so I repeated grade 4. So I'm not an academic, obviously. So I had to. At the age of 18, doing senior, I grappled with the fact that why was this sinful? Because basically your imagination was doing it all. We were all at school, we weren't doing anything, and it was a really huge obstacle. And then when I left school and didn't have any boyfriends. Poor Dad, he was quite upset because, I didn't have any, I was the wallflower. As I got older and then got married and had children, I actually realised that impure thoughts were going to be my survival through life, that I could dream, I could imagine, I could go anywhere I wanted to, whether it be pure or impure. And it was creativity that really was a weapon. At the time, I didn't realise it, but then the film Feeling Sexy was really telling the world that impure thoughts were okay.
That is a most interesting barrier, I suppose. Who would have thought it was sin? Cherrell, was yours sin?
Well, it's interesting. It's internal, though. I think it is the way you perceive yourself. That was my biggest barrier, the way I perceived myself and my confidence in my ability to do anything, to contribute usefully to a group. And I think it was actually, that was my biggest barrier, and all through my life. The challenge is believing that I'm actually capable of doing something.
And so from your friend's confidence in you, obviously sin was also your greatest barrier, but anything else? Or
I'm so glad that Davida's done sin, so I don't need to. I think that probably for me, my greatest barrier, and it's along the same lines, was actually an innate conservatism that I think that my parents had inspired in me. My parents were in many ways very progressive people in the way that they thought about the world, and they were people who did think a lot about the world, who read a lot, who read the papers, who went to movies and theatre and who talked broadly, and so did their friends. But in some ways also, I think they were fairly conservative, and the way that one was supposed to actually go about things was the right way, and there was a way to go about things. And I found, although at university I was very attracted to the students who got very involved in the more radical movements that were going on, and I shared houses with people who were presidents of the Students' Union at the time, I found it quite difficult to get directly involved in student politics because I don't think that I had been able to separate myself enough from what I thought my parents wanted and my schooling at, maybe I won't say it, but my schooling, which had been, again, very a wonderful school in terms of what it taught me about the content, but a school that was quite conservative in terms of their expectations. So certainly the school expected us to become professional women, but they expected us to become professional women with great decorum and to end up getting married and having kids. And I'm not too sure whether we were expected to work after that, although clearly that's what all the teachers were doing, which was something happened there that was always a bit of a tension for me. But so, and it took... It was that same thing. It took until I started to see the clients for whom I so wanted to work that I lost my inhibitions about being very vocal, being radical, standing on streets and demonstrating, going and writing to politicians and speaking out. Probably at times when people would have preferred that, is that Zoe going to ask another question again? I always, if I go to a conference still that, particularly say a family law practitioners conference, where I haven't been asked to speak, and I don't mean this arrogantly, I mean this because of the message. If what that means is that family violence isn't on the program, I will speak from the floor. I will stand up and ask the questions that I think need to be asked of the people who run the system, who have the power in the system. But at 19, I wouldn't have done that. Mm-hmm. But at 50, I will do that with glee.
That's wonderful. I think that is a very, very good set of answers to the barrier question. Other questions from the floor? Right up the back on the right-hand side.
Hi, I just want to ask the speakers how they perceive young women today, their views of feminism, the young women they come across.
Well, I'll have a stab. Start off. I've got a huge amount of time and confidence for young women today. I think they are fantastic, and I've got great confidence that they will continue to drive the agenda so that the world is a better place going forward. But I think that they're subject to huge pressures. We've all referred to the pressures that we were subjected to. We resisted those pressures and we found our own way through the morass. I think the young women of today will do the same. But I think we're much better now at mentoring, we're much better at encouraging, we're much better at assisting, and we're much better at helping young women to be confident and to go for it, to do the things that perhaps Zoe was intimidated about doing, that I was intimidated about doing. Doesn't sound as if Davida was intimidated about doing anything. So I've got great confidence in the young women of the future.
Davida, have you got a comment?
I mean, I can only speak as a mother. I've got 4 grown-up girls that still will ring up crying because they've had an employment interview and a particular one last week, which, whether this answers the question or not, but she rang from the park because the job interview, and she felt it undermined her. All the questions were she was unable to answer them confidently, and she felt that she hadn't answered them properly. And all I could do as a mother is say, for God's sake, it doesn't matter. Just, and very similar to what Doctor has just said here, is to have confidence in what you can do. And I said to this daughter, for God's sake, even if you need to get a pencil and paper, write down the things that you know that you can do, the hurdles that you've jumped in the 6 months of this new job. And if they don't know about it, it doesn't matter. Just get over it. And it comes back to the very first thing I said here, that we need people to help us. We need people. We can't do it on our own. And, you know, whether the world is still looking on us as another species, which, you know, we are, whether we're lame ducks to a lot of other people in the world, i.e. the other sex, whatever the barriers that we've still got in front of us, we need help as people. We need to get you don't need an army, but you do need someone there to help you. And I couldn't be where I am had I not had help. And I don't think my daughter would have gone to work the next day had she not had Mum helping her.
Thank you, Davida. It's a very personal story. It's great. Zoe?
Look, I mean, I also share great enthusiasm for young women, and I now as an academic at Griffith University, I see these wonderful young women law students in my courses, and I see their energy and their cleverness and their self-assuredness, and this gives me great hope. But I also think that a discussion about young women can... I think that we need to understand that the young women come from very many different places, and I think that we have not dealt properly in Australia yet with class or with race or with different cultural backgrounds. I think that for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, for many women from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, I think that for many women who simply come from families where poverty and perhaps you might say social chaos reigns, it is not easy for those women to imagine the world that young women who've come from more secure backgrounds or who've come from privilege and who've come from other expectations, so that for those women there will be a series of issues that they will have to deal with to even get to the same starting block. And I don't think that we've yet learnt how to deal with those issues. And I suppose I would say that, look, I'm not working as a practitioner anymore, but the women who are coming into women's legal service, the young women who are coming into women's legal service, are sadly... we had our 20th birthday in 2004, just at the time that I left. And one of the difficult things that we had to acknowledge was that women were still walking through our doors, young women were still walking through our doors with the same problems that young women had walked through our doors with 20 years before. Now, there were also different problems, but for women whose lives are not simple, they are still not simple. And for those women, it is very difficult to construct brave horizons. Young women who are 17 and pregnant are not going to get to go to whatever the equivalent of the Sydney Art School is now. They're going to find themselves at home, and they're probably not going to find the father of that child with them when they're 19. And these are real life situations.
But Zoe, if the next generation has more women like you in it, then the ratio will keep on changing. I mean, that's my hope.
And I suppose going back to the question, do you think it has, Zoe?
I don't think it's a good idea for me to become a benchmark here. I think that'd be.
But for just one moment, pretending this is not because it is my observation that, as usual, all of the women on our panel will say it's not me, it's a whole lot of people. So we're not talking about Zoe Rathus for a moment. Yes. But what do you, in terms of Cherrell's point and the question, do you think there are more women out there fighting for this?
Without a doubt, because I certainly. If we're talking about in Australia and our community in Queensland, which I guess this is particularly celebrating, there's no question that for many women, vastly different opportunities are opened up, and there is an expectation that you can do things, and women have opportunities to travel, to read, to form friends across class, across culture, across race, in a way that is perhaps wasn't so available. And I think that those things do start to change people dramatically. And there is no... Look, the class that I teach in law looks not too dissimilar. They're a bit younger, but on the whole. But it looks... Not that I can see you all very well with the bright lights, but in terms of gender proportions, there are many more women doing law. What I do hope is that really does mean that law will be practiced differently in the future. Practiced differently for the clients and practiced differently within the way that law firms and other organisations around the law support their staff. And that one of the things has to be in that a recognition of men's role in the family. So this is very importantly about also not minimising women. So I get very frustrated when everyone only wants to talk about parenting leave as if maternity leave is somehow the same. Maternity leave is about being pregnant, carrying a child and giving birth, and it's a very important thing, and we mustn't conflate those things. But we also have to get as interested in ensuring that men can really contribute in that private sphere of the home. And if we don't do that, then young women are going to find that in 5 years' time their lives are like the lives of their mothers and aunts.
Thank you, Zoe. I'd like to make sure I finish us up on time, so I want to put the last question to the panel, unless there's any other burning questions that people would like to get out. But you will recall that I did mention that I wanted to finish the discussion somewhat. And Zoe, I'm actually going to pick up where you left. It's okay, I'll ask it again, because as we could already see from your last remarks, it's a shame you can't get passionate about things. But the question was.
I overcame that.
Indeed. The question was, and I get this will be equally to each of the three of you. The burning issues. For reform in your heart, more so than your mind, in 2008? Is it where you were leaving off a moment ago?
I mean, I really think that the most important thing is reform in the private sphere. Can I say two things?
Of course
I think
you can.
It's about reform in the private sphere, so I think that, and that's, not reform with a capital R, this is governments and government policy contributes to that, but it is actually... bringing about real change in the way that people are able to structure their families and what having a family means. But also within that is a real recognition of the diversity of people in our community. It is about, we've had the apology, we must move forward from there and come up with real ways of ensuring that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia take an absolute... that every person from our First Nations can absolutely fulfil every possible potential in their lives, that people who come to Australia have those opportunities, that people's sexuality is irrelevant to what it is that they are able to achieve. We simply have to make those moves, and those moves are important privately and publicly, and those things simply have to happen, and that's where I see... those are the challenges. But I do have a sense that this younger generation is facing these challenges slightly differently. And I'm going to say one more thing, which was that I am a summiteer. I went to the summit. And one of the things that I found absolutely fascinating was that I found that the group that I was in, the Families, Communities and Social Inclusion group, seemed a bit afraid about gender because social inclusion this is where I got my thing about, paternity leave and maternity leave. But what I found was that the information that came through to us from the Youth Summit, they had been much braver about gender. They had talked about violence against women, whereas we seem to talk about violence. And they had also greatly elevated the importance of issues for Indigenous people and for refugees. And that came through very powerfully from the Youth Summit. And so that must speak volumes for a different future in Australia.
So plenty of good fights still to be had. Cherrell?
Agreed, 100%. Many, many big battles still to be fought. We've come a long way, and I think I tried to make that point that whilst we're nowhere near where we might be for women across the spectrum of society, there are more women, I think, that are recognised, that are working hard and are striving to improve a lot for all women. But we do have a long way to go. We need to absolutely dramatically increase the visibility of women's capability, of women's achievements, of women's contribution to our society. As women, we're very bad, and I include myself in this, at understating and downplaying our contribution over and over again. And so the recognition, the visibility, it's not awards, it's not medals, it's not anything like that. It's a recognition that women in every sphere of life are making the world a different place and a better place, and they're contributing significantly to that movement forward. We need to showcase that. We need to have it out there so the young women of today can see it happening, can be part of it and caught up in it, and that it can continue with exponentially going forward. We have a long, long way to go.
Thank you. And Davida, finally.
I just agree with these two girls here, totally and utterly. I think we just have to believe in yourself. And maybe primary school teachers have got, and mothers at home.
Mothers and fathers.
And anyone. Again, this people. I did this fabulous shirt in the 60s, and it just had people written over it. And in the 60s I was pretty booby, so I used to love wearing this T-shirt because literally, it was just people, and people have to help other people, and when it comes to women, the people, i.e. the teachers and the friends, just have to say to a woman, look, stand up and believe in yourself. Shout it, which is what you two are saying. Shout it. Why don't we shout it? Is there something in women that we don't shout? I mean, is that Victorian, prim and proper, quiet thing a genetical thing? I don't know.
I don't think it's genetic. It's deeply, deeply embedded in our culture and our behaviour patterns. And little girls from a very, very small age are taught to be quiet and, good. Good.
So go home and teach your little girls to shout from the bottom of their hearts, loud and long. I will draw this wonderful conversation to a close. I think you'll agree that the founders of the Women's Progressive Club, as it then was, the Brisbane Women's Club, would be very proud to have their memories honoured by the discussion that we've just had from these reforming women of the 21st century. It's so hard to try to draw out the key points when there have been so many, but it is interesting when you sit here and take a little track of them. Cherrell, I think from you, I've just written the great motivator against your name. What you kept talking about was what we finished with, the need to drum into our young women and ourselves the confidence, the belief in ourselves. I liked what you said, Davida, about write down the things that you know that you have done and are good at, but it's write them down and shout about them. Motivation by those around you who are good at what they do and value that, and that perception, that belief in yourself. Thank you for those insights, Cherrell. Zoe, against you I wrote, is that Zoe going to ask a question again? Asking the question and being right out there, taking the issues for reform to the very edge and continuing to shout. I think that's what many of us certainly in the legal community would say about Zoe Rathus in a very positive way, that she is going to ask that darn question again. And your comment that reform is about the small things that make change, not about, big individual things that any one person does, but joining together with a whole lot of ordinary people that make those breakthroughs possible. And finally, Davida, against you I've written the Sermon of Anton and the Flat Shoes. You gave us so many remarkable practical insights into the realities, I think, about the motivators and the importance of having people like, in your case, Betty Churcher, but people that we not only give us opportunities, but that we take opportunities from, that we accept, I should say, accept those opportunities from. And in so doing overcome the obstacle of sin. Would you thank all of our panellists?
And would you also join me in thanking one of the best chairs we've ever had sitting on the stage, Elizabeth Jamison. Thank you so much. One of the lovely things was to look in this audience and see that there are quite a number of young women here tonight. So I'm really pleased the State Library has attracted you here tonight, and you've had the privilege of hearing these three motivating women. As an art student in the late 70s in what was the college that came in after East Sydney, I have always followed Davida's example, if you like, and used her as an inspiration for my career and for my own personal life. So it's really lovely to see people on stage, even at my age, and to have those role models sitting here. One of the things we did want to do was just to say, thank you again to the Brisbane Women's Club for inspiring us to put this on here at the State Library. We encourage, endorse and absolutely, if we could, chain you up and force you to go and look at the exhibition. So if you can't do it, and you can't tonight because unfortunately it's closed, please do come back another time and have a look at the exhibition and the book collection. And it's a really wonderful thing that collection, actually, I forgot to say earlier, will end up here as part of the State Library's collection, because the Brisbane Women's Club have donated all of their records, their minutes, to the library to keep here for the future. So without further ado, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you wouldn't mind, on your way out, we have feedback forms. We love you to fill them out. It's the only way we can keep these sorts of programs going on. So please fill them out for us. We'd also encourage you to subscribe to our magazine, because you'll get that in the post and you will hear about all these wonderful things that we do here. And we'd ask you also, or remind you also, that there will be a lovely session called Tea and Music, which is a morning tea called Women in Song, and it'll be held on Tuesday, November the 25th. So if you can make it along to that, it's a great session, and at that actually there will be an announcement of a scholarship that the Brisbane Women's Club support as well. So all in all, could you join with me one more time in thanking this extraordinary panel